Beautiful. Our scriptures this morning are from Genesis and 1 Corinthians. Hear the word of the Lord. From Genesis 32, verses 24 through 31. But Jacob stayed apart by himself, and a man wrestled with him until dawn broke. When the man saw that he couldn't defeat Jacob, he grabbed Jacob's thigh and tore a muscle in Jacob's thigh as he wrestled with him. The man said, "Let me go, because the dawn is breaking." But Jacob said, "I won't let you go until you bless me." And he said to Jacob, "What is your name?" And Jacob said, "Jacob." Then he said, "Your name won't be Jacob any longer, but Israel, because you struggled with God and with men and won." But Jacob also asked and said, "Tell me your name." But he said, "Why do you ask for my name?" And he blessed Jacob there. And Jacob named the place Peniel, because I've seen God face to face, and my life has been saved. The sun rose as Jacob passed Peniel, limping because of his thigh. And from the New Testament, from 1 Corinthians chapter 11, verses 23 through 26. I received a tradition from the Lord, which I also handed on to you. On the night in which he was betrayed, the Lord Jesus took bread. After giving thanks, he broke it and said, "This is my body, which is for you. Do this to remember me." He did the same thing with the cup after they had eaten, saying, "This cup is the new covenant in my blood. Every time you drink it, do this to remember me. Every time you eat this bread and drink this cup, you broadcast the death of the Lord until he comes." This is the word of God for the people of God. Thanks be to God. So I'm continuing in my sermon series, that is only once a month, the testimony, "This I Believe." And so today I'm going to tell you my testimony to how I was called into ministry. Because one of the things about the way that we tell stories is that we are invited to, me telling you my story is an invitation to tell your story. And so this is an invitation for you. So I want to let you know, I did not want to be a pastor. Like I said last time, and I grew up in the church. I grew up as a preacher's kid, and especially when I was 12, we moved from one of the downtown churches in Columbus, Georgia, to a town half the size of the previous church's membership. So let your brains do that for a second. The town was half the size of the previous church. And it was probably the biggest culture shock that I'd ever experienced. I was 12. I have experienced other culture shocks since then, but it was pretty large. And when we moved there, we moved to a church that needed more grace and had little grace for us. And one of the ways that got to be expressed was we have great parsonage stories about mushrooms growing out of the bathroom floor and possum living inside our bathroom tub, because it was a fiberglass tub. And so one time we had a hole and we had the possum nearly get into our house, and it was very exciting. And that was just like the external version of how difficult it can be to be a pastor. And so I knew it was hard. And I didn't want to be part of that hard. And so I was also very interested in marine biology. And so I went to college and I got my degree in biology. And so I can tell you the Anthropocene, all the different versions of how we understand our world from a scientific perspective, and I still really love that has been part of what I have learned and what I know, and how it has helped me understand even things in the church, and allowed me to participate in conversations and be present with people as we do things like struggling with medical issues, or as we struggle with what does it mean to hold what we understand about the world, both from a scientific perspective and from a faith perspective. And so I see ways that has helped me hold those together. And I really did like marine biology. I really liked the ocean. I still really love the ocean. I love learning about the ways that systems work, especially our water systems, especially what happens where rivers meet the ocean and how that's such a different space and what can grow there and what lives there and how that helps our systems of living and breathing and our water and how it provides what we need to breathe. And so I got a degree in biology. And then I was like, well, I'm not sure I want to go. If you get a degree in biology, you want to do marine biology, then you have to go get another degree. That's what you always have to do. And so to be able to do that, I would have had to have gotten a master's or a PhD in a biology thing. And I looked at those, and none of them felt right. And so in the meantime, I decided to serve while I was in discernment. And so I applied to the Peace Corps. And I got in and I went to Kenya, and I lived in Kenya for a year and a half. And I ended up going to Kenya a full year after I graduated. And so there was this space of time between when I graduated college and when I started Peace Corps, and a year of time of waiting. And I really want to honor that waiting time, that I learned who I was more outside of college before I became who I was when I went and served in Peace Corps. Because I was in Savannah, and so I worked as a part-time, as a lab tech in a pharmacy. And I worked as a lab tech in a pharmacy when Medicare Part D dropped. So if I know probably all of you are part of Medicare Part, or many of you understand that Medicare Part D is complicated, and I was there when we were talking about it. And so that's part of the way that I understood how people struggle with systems and how sometimes, because the only way you could get information was to go online, and that's not always the best way to get information to all of our populations. But anyway, so I went to Kenya, and I went and served as a healthcare volunteer. I did sex education and HIV/AIDS education, and so I learned how to help teach and help to raise awareness around sex ed and HIV/AIDS, and I spent a lot of time in discernment. One of the gifts that I have from my past self is I kept a daily journal after I graduated and until I got back from Kenya. And so I went back, and there was a particular night that I had while I was in Kenya. And when I was resting and I was dreaming, and I woke up that morning after wrestling with God and decided to apply to seminary, to give in. And when I got up that morning, I had a limp. And so I felt like I had wrestled with God, and that God had made sure that I knew when I got up that morning that God and I had wrestled. And in fact, when I was reading, one of the cool things is, so you know how when you have a calendar and something happens on a particular day, for instance, you get married. And I looked at my wedding anniversary, the date of my wedding anniversary in my journal. Now, when I wrote this journal, when I was in Kenya, I had not met John. I didn't know my husband existed at all. But I looked at that date. And it was the first day that I said, well, maybe I'll look to see what Duke Divinity School has to offer. And about 2 weeks later was the day that I woke up, and I couldn't sleep when I was in Kenya for a number of reasons. And I woke up and I did some Bible study, and then I wrote, and me and God wrestled. And I'm really thinking about Divinity School, praying hard about it. If this is the case, that I'll serve God the best, or if there is another, I truly hope I can see the way I should direct my path. This morning, I decided I would apply to Divinity School. I've been on the road for 8 years now. It's time to do something about it. Now I've just got to get some people in prayer for me, to make sure it's the way I need to go. I wrote that 15 years ago. And I went to divinity school. And in the midst of applying for ministry and being present with people, one of the reasons that I was called to this work is because of my conversations with my fellow volunteers in Kenya. Because one of the things that we found when we were having conversations together is that I shared my faith as an offering, and they received my faith as an offering and not an instruction. And so I was able to listen to them to share about their faith. And that continues to be the way that I encourage y'all to share your faith as an offering and to listen to how people share their journeys, because we're all on a journey together. And so I went to Kenya and I came back and I applied to div school and I ended up going to div school, and y'all know I have a degree from Duke. And I was appointed to my first church, and I was appointed to the same first church that my father served. And it was also a place that needed more grace than they were willing to share. But it continued to be a place where I could understand that grace was the most important way into relationship. That when it was hard because the people who were present were having a hard time. And even when we have hard times, it makes it harder for us to be gracious with others. Our hard times are offerings for other people to hold grace for us. And part of that grace is through the table of Eucharist. Indeed, we read where Paul said that Jesus offered grace to the disciples, created space for an offering so that they could share with him in this holy meal, so that when they returned to their meals, they could see the holiness that was offered to them at the table. Not just being at the table and receiving food, but also being at the table, receiving food with those around them. And that's what I see, what happens when we share at the table at Eucharist. Even when we do it weird, like we're doing right now, while we still are sitting in our pews and eating little crinkly packets, we still receive grace. And this grace is what we need to allow God to heal us in our brokenness. This grace that God invites us to as we participate in the life of the church, as we participate in how God is inviting us to be present with God and with God's people. Because the way that we receive grace and the way that we offer grace is through being in community with one another. And what a gift we have, that we have this gift of community with people around us. And the gift, as a pastor, is to be present with those who are receiving grace as we learn together, as we grow in discipleship with one another. Because I could be a great layperson. I could be someone who shows up and studies and always has the most impertinent question in a Sunday school class and keeps learning that way. And I think that that is one of the best offerings that people who are part of the membership of the church can do, to ask good questions and to participate and offer yourselves as participants, as partners. And so as a pastor, I am so honored that I get to partner with y'all and with other churches and with other people as we learn together, as y'all ask good questions that don't always have simple answers, but we can struggle with them together and learn together. And I know that I always have more to learn. And that's the gift of being a pastor, of journeying together with y'all, of remaining in this call. And it's one of the reasons why I'm so glad that I was able to finish my ordination journey with y'all. Because of the grace that I was offered from y'all, the grace that you offered to me, the grace I received as I learned and as I practiced, even continuing to practice the Bible study that I taught and the sermons that I continue to explore, as I've tested with the midweek videos, with my snippets. It's been an offering to be in partnership with y'all. Because you can't really be a pastor without people. You really need people with you, to journey with you, to be present with you, to create space for accountability so that we can be in partnership together. And so I'm really glad that I woke up that morning after not being able to sleep and said yes. That me and God wrestled together and we went on this journey together that started 15 years ago and is far from over. Because we are in partnership together and in a journey together as we continue to learn what it is to be disciples of Jesus Christ together. And so that's my testimony of how I was called into ministry. But I imagine that you also have been called into the ministry of the all believers, into the priesthood of all believers, as you have ministered to your friends, as you have offered your friendship to those around you, have offered the generous grace of your faith to those around you. And so I want you to pause. I'm going to give us like 30 seconds, and I want you to ask yourself, what is the story I would tell as I was practicing how I was called to faith and how I am called to share it? How indeed are you called to share your faith?